So the idea of spy disguises not fooling good players is complete and utter nonsense. Amidst the crazy chaos of your average TF2 shootout, spies disguises allow them to dance about the conflict and appear anywhere where anyone could least expect him to. This, however, comes with some caveats of course, as the spy learning curve is immense, and learning both your dance moves and your opponent's takes time. And well, this has led many a spy main to end up with a swollen ankle and have to sit the rest of the ball out. So in today's video I've scoured the layers of various spy mains around the globe and breached the unfathomably deep imaginations of my mind to present to you 1 to 2 tips for each spy disguise in TF2. How this works is that I'll be covering the classes in reverse order and I'll be giving various tips about positioning, the disguise itself, and how to blend into your surroundings. All of these clips I've recorded come from a mix of both casual and Lon'qudor servers. Most of these players know exactly what Spy can do and how he works, but that doesn't stop me from getting a couple cheeky kills. I guess I should also add at this point, however, that sometimes I don't feel like the greatest spy in the world. I do often get into the habit of stabbing and then immediately dying. However, I do have an Evangelion wallpaper on my second monitor and have the funny number of hours of spy in game, so that technically makes me the greatest spy player to ever live. But in case you're already foaming at the mouth that I preferred the rebuild Evangelion series to the original anime, make sure to comment down below a random timestamp within the video right now along with all the mistakes I made during that section and how you would have done better. But with everyone being equally ticked off, please subscribe and let me know if you'd like a part 2 to this, as there are still loads and loads of tips I had to leave out due to time constraints and I could easily compile them into a second video. But for now, the intro is long enough as is, so I think we'll just get started. So I've decided to cover the mercs in reverse order in this video, specifically so that I could talk about the support disguises first, because support disguises require the best positioning and awareness. So in terms of spy disguises, it's actually quite rare to see a spy disguised as another spy, but I honestly think this is quite a wasted missed opportunity around the TF2 community. In my opinion, the best time to disguise as another spy is when you are transitioning to or from the battlements, like for example if you're walking from spawn or if you're going to get a health pack. There are more than a few reasons as to why I recommend this, but the two main ones being the lack of speed penalty and of course positioning. So first off, the lack of speed penalty. So as we all know, spy speed changes with his disguises. The only times when your speed isn't changing is when you're either disguised as a spy, a medic or a scout. Moving to and from the battlements when disguised as another spy isn't going to hinder your movement speed at all, and therefore you'll be moving to and from the battlements as quickly as you can. And for the second one, when I mention the word positioning, I'm specifically talking about spawn outlines. You see, when you respawn in TF2, your entire team is outlined to you. You can see them through walls and you can see what they're doing. This feature is such a kick in the teeth for all good spy players, as well it basically alerts the entire enemy team as to where you are and to what you're doing. However, if you're disguised as a spy within your team's lines but what would be considered the enemy lines to the enemy team, well, that kind of makes a bit more sense than if you were disguised as, to say, a scout or a pyro. What the enemy team would see upon respawn is one of their spies behind enemy lines trying to get his picks. I tested this with a friend on an Lon'qudor server and this drastically lowered the amount of callouts the enemy team was performing on my position. It's not a completely watertight decision, but 90% of the time it works 100% of the time, so I actively do encourage disguising a spy when you're moving to and from the battlements. Now, sniper disguises are most effective when you are 100% aware of where the enemy's front lines and back lines are, because the best effective use of a good sniper disguise is knowing exactly where the enemy's back lines are and hovering around them. I imagine most Tumblr users are going to be pretty good at using sniper disguises effectively, as they kind of require a little bit of roleplay. You need to be pretending to keep an eye on the flanks and also pretending to keep an eye on the chokes as well. Now in terms of demonstrating this effectively, there's a fantastic clip from LazyPurple's How It Feels to Play Spy that I'm just going to play for you now.
Nothing compares to the feeling of hiding in plain sight. Here, I'm pretending to be a sniper keeping an eye on the choke point. This engineer looks right at me and then proceeds to backpedal into my loving arms.
Everyone back to the base, partner.
I honestly couldn't have demonstrated that any better myself. If you haven't seen that video already, I highly recommend you check it out. It's linked down in the description below, but I'm going to assume you already have. So let's break this clip down slowly to demonstrate my points. So just as I previously stated, in this clip, LazyPurple is pretending to keep an eye on the choke point, pretending to keep an eye on the action as to where the teams will both meet. This, of course, makes his team around him trust him, and, well, the rest of the clip plays out for itself. What's excellently demonstrated in this clip is that he isn't running around willy-nilly, he's not behind enemy lines as to where he shouldn't be, he's specifically planted as to where a normal sniper would be, and that of course makes his team believe him. So in short, the key to a good sniper disguise is positioning yourself just outside the choke point as to where you know the enemy is going to engage in combat. The only other thing I can recommend for sniper disguises is that when you are disguising as a sniper, you actively run the ambassador, as well you're probably going to be side by side with some other snipers on the enemy team, and well, if you're doing your job right, they're going to be running the Razorback. And a couple good well placed shots on a tunnel vision sniper running the Razorback is going to do the work of a knife just fine. Now, in all honesty, I don't recommend you disguise as a medic in most scenarios, as when anyone on the enemy team sees a medic, their general stratagem is to run towards them, and for a spy to be most effective, the enemy needs to be facing away from him. However, I still do have a couple tips for the corresponding scenarios. So first off, the big one, make sure you are actively holding your medigun and no other weapon, as when you default disguise to a medic, he will be holding his syringe gun. Remember to press B on the keyboard whilst holding your sapper to swap to the medigun. And my second tip being that medic disguises are actually quite good at getting rid of engineers. If you run towards the engineer sentry nest holding your melee whilst calling medic and heading for his dispenser, he might just think you're an injured player looking for some healing. I know this sounds like a dumb tip on paper, but in practice I performed this many a time to gullible engineers and taken down many a sentry nest. First, make sure your disguise has actually taken some damage, so therefore running towards the dispenser would make a little bit more sense. And second, make sure you don't sap the dispenser immediately. Crouch next to it, pretend like you're getting some healing, spam the thank you button, and then pick off the engineer and his sentry. Again, I know it sounds dumb on paper, but the amount of times this has worked for me in practice is hilarious. And well, Spy is all about roleplaying and disguising, so give it a go, you might enjoy it. And, well, it might just work. Sorry that last section was a little bit short, I just really don't have too many tips for when it comes to disguising as medic. However, when it comes to disguising as engineer, I do actually have a very bizarre one. And, well, it's so bizarre it might just work most of the time. So when it comes to disguising as engineers, free-to-play engineers specifically, don't immediately destroy the buildings after killing them. If he is a free-to-play engineer, for example, he won't have access to voice chat or text chat and therefore cannot perform a spy callout when he is dead. So if you disguise as him, pick him off, and hang around his buildings, you might be able to get a couple chain stabs. Again, sorry, another short one, as well, I honestly don't recommend disguising as engineer, as an engineer without any buildings surrounding him is kind of a bit suspicious, but if you do want to, this is probably the best way you could. Okay, hear me out on this one. Heavy disguises are not that bad, and the reason being that no one will ever guess your disguise as a heavy because he is the slowest class in the game, and therefore that can lead to many hilarious scenarios after which you just completely trick oblivious people. This is one of the greatest examples of this I've ever recorded. You see all of these players here? None of them dared to question that I was a spy because no one would ever think I would disguise as a heavy. And even the heavy who's on the cart, who even turned around to the camera to look at me, didn't even suspect me because I was a heavy. I mean, he was probably a free-to-play, so there's maybe some of that plays into this. But even so, this is just the greatest clip ever. I can't believe this worked. And even the medic who bumped into me didn't suspect I was a spy, purely because I was a heavy. I know it's incredibly impractical, but after this video, I'm constantly disguising as heavy. I guess the only other tip I have to give is that do not use the cloak and dagger, because if you're disguised as a heavy, you're going to be moving incredibly slow, so the majority of your movement is going to be spent under cloak, as well you will return to your normal movement speed. So make sure you're using the stock invis watch, not the cloak and dagger, not the dead ringer, and certainly not the Your Eternal Reward. Okay, so the entirety of the Demo Man section is going to be taken up by Demo Knight disguise tips, as well there's a lot to talk about, a lot of bugs, and a lot of things to bear in mind. And before Solar Light leaves a comment asking, I guess I could have dedicated an entire section just to Demo Knight tips, but I didn't really have any plain tips for disguising as just Demo Man as a whole. And, well, the video is getting pretty long, so I don't want to stretch it out any longer than it needs to be. So first off, the boots. If you're disguised as any other class holding a weapon, and then you change to a Demo Man who's holding a boots, sometimes the weapons will be invisible. Or sometimes even the boots will be invisible. In my testings, sometimes the Demo Man will be holding the wrong primary, sometimes he won't be holding anything, and well, the best way to avoid this entirely is just to disguise as a Demo Man from the bat. So the second thing to talk about specifically relates to the Eyelander. So if you disguise as a Demo Man with maximum heads, you will not gain the speed boost and you will not gain the glowing eye effect. This is an important thing to keep in mind if the enemy team actively knows the Demo Man is alive and has all of his heads. The next thing to note is that if the Demo Knight is using the Scotsman Skullcutter, you will not gain the speed penalty. This is obviously great for getting to places, but not very good for blending in. As well, it's quite difficult to notice as the boots give you a 10% speed bonus anyway, so you're only really disguising about a 5% or so speed penalty, but it's still quite noticeable to a trained eye. And I could go on for a lot longer in terms of Demo Knight bugs in particular, but the last thing I'm going to mention is that if the Demo Knight gets a half Zatoichi kill and it shows up in the kill feed, your katana will not be bloodied. So I'm not entirely sure what scenario this information might be useful in. maybe if, for example, the Demo Knight had a Pocket Medic, and then the Pocket Medic loses sight of the Demo Knight, comes down the corner, finds you, your katana's not bloodied, maybe he noticed, maybe he kills you, maybe he taunts, I'm not entirely too sure, but it's something you could bear in mind, I guess. We're going to move on from Demo Man now, Demo Knight in particular, but there's so much more I could potentially cover, so like I said earlier in the video, please like and subscribe, and let me know down below in the comments if you'd like a part 2 to this, because, well, the Demo Knight section would fill up basically the entire video. So it's my opinion that Pyro is the single greatest disguise the spy could possibly choose for practically any scenario. Considering how Pyro kind of plays his pick power support role, he can basically be doing any sort of situation in any sort of scenario and not stick out like a sore thumb. One of the greatest tips I could possibly give when disguising as Pyro is to not immediately go for obvious stabs. By not going for obvious stabs on, for example, lower experienced players, you could potentially trick the higher experienced players into thinking that you're not a spy and therefore pick them off first. Now I know that tip can basically translate onto most disguises for most classes, but I generally find that Pyro disguises allow you to get into that scenario more often. It's also quite hard to be out of place as Pyro, as he's basically found debris on the map, from defending the sentry nest, to being with the medic, to just being on the front lines. So if you're on a wide open map like most King of the Hill maps, I 100% recommend you disguise as a Pyro, as, well, it'll be quite hard for you to be misplaced. The only other tip I have to give for Pyro disguises is that you don't gain the speed boost from holding out the power jack, so make sure you're not holding it out whilst you're running. It might not sound like something that's easy to spot, but to a Pyro main it 100% would be, and a Pyro main is the last thing you want to be encountering as a spy player. So soldier disguises kind of fall into the category of heavy disguises, as no one really expects you to be disguising as them because they're naturally just very slow. So whilst this can lead to some cheeky stabs here and there, I honestly don't recommend you disguise as soldier purely because it's just too obvious to good players. You see, a good soldier is going to be rocket jumping his way towards the front lines, and well, if there's a soldier not doing that, you can clearly tell something's wrong. I also don't really know where to slot this into the video, but I do want to say it, so I'm just going to put it in here. There are several things a spy will and will not be affected by when disguised. So for example, you can heal from the blue team's payload and you can heal from an enemy dispenser, yet for example, you don't gain the buffs of an enemy buff banner soldier. That last one in particular is an important thing to remember when disguising as any of the power classes in general, as well, when a soldier's pushing with a banner as a power class, you're expected to join in. So have that one for free in this category, as there's really not much else to talk about apart from the fact that you don't gain the movement speed bonus by the escape plan. But yeah, like I said earlier, I really don't recommend disguising as soldier. And finally, Scout, the single most overrated disguise a spy could possibly pick. Now, of course, in accordance to the last video in which I mentioned overrated things, people seem to think that the word overrated means that the person in question hates that thing. And, well, that's just not true. I do not hate Scout disguises, they are obviously incredibly popular for a reason, but they are incredibly overrated, as most spies will default to disguising as Scout, when in reality there are just more effective disguises for each and every option. Scout disguises, much like Pyro disguises, should be seen as a generalist option for most scenarios, as Scout can generally be found on most places of the map. And he has the added bonus of not slowing your movement speed, which is always a nice thing, but then again, that is kind of the biggest problem with Scouts. The fact that your movement speed isn't raised to what the Scout is. This is the reason as to why I think Scout disguises are very, very overrated, but just to be on the safe side and to avoid all the angry bobs, I'm going to cover some of the ways to which you can disguise this. So first off, figure of eighting, or strafing I guess if you want to call it. Incorporating the A and D keys into your movement greatly hides the fact that you're not moving at normal Scout speed, but make sure to keep your strafes wide, as if you're just tapping A and D repeatedly, well, it's going to look a little bit dumb. The second tip, and probably the best in helping hiding this, is disguising as a Scout using the Babyface's blaster. So of course this thing lowers your base movement speed. Not quite to the levels that Spy would be moving at, but enough to kind of make players think, oh okay, that kind of makes sense. And the last tip about hiding your movement speed I could possibly give is to act as much like a Scout as you possibly could, and by that I mean specifically spamming voice lines. I'm not too sure if it's a global thing or just an inexperienced player thing, but I've found that by spamming voice lines I am massively reducing the chances of me being spy checked. Again, I really don't know why this is, but just spam voice lines, people won't check you. I guess the purpose of spies disguises really are about role-playing and getting into the character of the merc you're disguised as, and well, when it comes to Scouts in particular, be loud, especially if they're wearing brightly coloured cosmetics. And that's all I've got for this video. Thank you so much everyone for watching. I'm actually quite happy with how this video turned out, so I hope when I upload it, everybody just doesn't flame me. Okay, like I said earlier, I'm not the greatest spy, but what I am is a pretty good TF2 player, and these are just things I picked up from maining other classes in general. I am by no definition, nor do I ever want to be a spy main, but I play so many other classes, and these are generally things I've observed good spies doing, so I thought I'd just compile them into a small list for you. I did do my research before creating this video, obviously, and these are generally tips I haven't seen other spy mains on YouTube talk about, so hopefully this video is not too dissimilar to something you might have seen before. The only other thing I have to say is thank you very much everyone for watching, and I'm really sorry that this video took such a long time to make. I really wanted this one to be good, and therefore I put a lot of research hours into it, and, well, time is just time. I hope you like the graphics as well. There should be a little video on screen as to how I made them. I put a lot of hours into them as well, but if you'd like to see more of these kind of stuff, just, you know, subscribe, hang around, and there's more to come. But apart from that, I'm stalling now, sorry. Thank you very much everyone for watching, and I will see you later down the sunny road.